From Brisbane, the barge Mayora transports goods and vehicles to Moreton Island, one of the many sandy islands formed by the action of wind and tide in Moreton Bay. Moreton Island is a wilderness area, largely untouched by development, with natural sandy coast, wildlife and vegetation, and delightful scenic spots accessible to the responsible LandCruiser driver. The first step in preparing for a trip through sand is to provide better tyre flotation by deflating them to around half their normal road pressures. They should be checked with a tyre gauge for even pressures all round. Driving in sand is largely a matter of vehicle momentum, so four-wheel drive high range is selected. Steep slopes can only be tackled at reasonable velocities and must be approached head-on to prevent slipping or tipping. Just below the top, back off the accelerator slightly to avoid getting airborne and causing damage. If you don't make it, reverse down on engine compression, keeping to the tracks you made going up. Tyres tend to dig into sand, probably more than on any other surface, and this characteristic will get you into trouble if you get sideways on a slope. A vehicle that is being driven continuously in sandy conditions should have special sand tyres fitted for optimum performance. It's also a good idea to practice before taking an extended trip and seek out advice of people who have had sand driving experience. The LandCruiser will go down some incredibly steep slopes with relative ease. At the top, cut across the ridge at right angles to prevent the vehicle tipping. Stay as close to a direct line to the bottom as possible. Use four-wheel drive high range, applying small amounts of throttle to straighten out any slips. Never use brakes alone or freewheel down a slope. Sand is really tough on vehicles because it has the capacity to get into moving parts and cause problems with seals, bearings and couplings. Also, when it's being driven in sand, your LandCruiser is operating at high engine speeds. So when you stop, leave the engine running for a few minutes to allow it to cool down. The coastal fringe of Australia offers some magnificent trips for the responsible LandCruiser driver. But coastal areas are fragile and plants cling to life in a stern and uncertain environment. Use the defined tracks and remember that irresponsible or thoughtless driving on a vegetated dune can upset the balance irreparably. Beach and dune driving is prohibited in some areas, so check with the authorities first. Sand is constantly on the move, and wind-blown sand patches can trap a vehicle. Getting out is largely a matter of technique, and the trick is not to use too much power, which will cause wheel spin and bog you up to the axles. Instead, back up to compact the sand, and using four-wheel drive high range, try again. The combination of power and momentum should get you through. If you get stuck again, repeat the process. And sometimes it's to your advantage to select low-range second gear to ensure that the LandCruiser will generate sufficient initial momentum to get through. The soft sand above the high water mark is hard on vehicles, but you must check the tidal information before taking to the hard-packed sand that lies between the high and low water marks. If you're not sure, stay in the dry sand at the top of the beach, because it's easier to get a vehicle out of dry sand than out of the wet stuff. Common sense procedure after some beach travel is to hose the vehicle down thoroughly to remove sand and salt spray, which could cause rusting. Where a creek crosses your path, don't go hammering through it, because the sand under the water may be unstable. Instead, head for the dry stuff at the top of the beach and stay there until you're past the creek and can get back to the hard-packed sand at the water's edge. Sometimes, despite your best efforts, your vehicle will get stuck. And the problem with many sandy areas is that there may not be a tree or rock to anchor your winch cable to. An important part of your luggage is a shovel. And this, plus some muscle power, will enable you to get free of a situation like this. Dig a hole about 1 metre deep and place a large object in it. A large piece of driftwood or your spare wheel are ideal. To this you attach a chain or web sling which is paid out along a channel. Attach the winch cable to the chain and pack loose sand around the wheel very firmly. Now you have an anchor point that will take considerable strain. Start your engine to assist the winch and gradually ease the vehicle free, remembering to take the safety precaution of keeping clear of the stressed cable. The winch can be further assisted by engaging four-wheel drive low range and applying the power to the wheels. Thus, the shovel is an important tool for recovering your LandCruiser. And while we're on the subject, other useful items to carry include water, oil, a spare fan belt and air filter. Travelling in company with another vehicle is sound safety procedure if either runs into trouble. In sand, never attempt to tow the bogged vehicle out, because if both get bogged, you're faced with a situation where there are two vehicles bogged to the axles at both ends of a highly stressed tow rope. It's not easy to get out of that one, so the recovery vehicle should only be used as an anchor. The narrow sandy tracks of the coastal fringe are enjoyable to drive on, but make sure of using the highest gear possible to avoid cutting up the surface. Remember too that others use the tracks and excessive speed could result in a head-on collision. The more sparsely populated sandy roads and desert tracks of the interior have high temperatures and wind-blown debris to cause problems. It's sound practice to check that spinifex and other materials don't clog the radiator or collect around the drive shafts and couplings. Some of the major roads of the inland look like this. Wide dirt tracks with patches of the infamous bull dust that make driving conditions interesting to say the least. In slow motion, see how the dust swirls around the engine compartment. And in these conditions, it's advisable to check the air filter frequently and replace it if necessary. West from Ayers Rock are the Olgas, an amazing rock formation of massive domes rising to 546 metres above the surrounding plain. Despite the harsh, dry environment, the area teems with wildlife and vegetation. It is National Parks policy to protect the native flora and fauna. Visitors are kept to well-defined roads that are laid out to provide ample opportunity to enjoy the natural wonders of the region. A far cry from the merciless heat and arid conditions of the Red Centre, a LandCruiser of the National Parks and Wildlife Service is on the early morning road patrol in the Kosciuszko National Park. The Ranger faces extreme cold and icy road conditions, where by driving in four-wheel drive high range, he can improve road holding and reduce the risk of sliding, even if the snow gets deeper. Vehicle momentum is important in snow driving. So too is keeping between the markers on the road. The snowdrifts on either side of the road may look nice, but they could be deep enough to trap a vehicle to an alarming depth.
Jindabyne right through to Sawpick Creek at the moment is code 1. From Sawpick Creek through to Perisher Valley remains code 3. The link road is now impassable to traffic and will be closed. Did you copy over?
Where the snow is hard-packed and very icy, wheel spin may be overcome by rocking the vehicle free. Select reverse, using the clutch to gently ease the LandCruiser back a short distance each time until it is out. A four-wheel drive vehicle can lose traction on steep, snowy slopes. Chains are required, and they need to be fitted to all four wheels. The necessary bite and traction needed to get through these conditions is supplied by the chains and four-wheel drive. A shovel is a vital piece of equipment to have if snow traps your vehicle. Although the exercise may keep you warm, protection against cold and exposure is a survival necessity. Snow looks pretty, but it's potentially very dangerous. Mud may not give you frostbite, but it can give you a king-size headache. If you must drive in really muddy conditions, the thing to remember is that you need traction rather than brute power. And if you anticipate doing a lot of mud driving, Bar tread tyres with heavy-duty lugs will assist your LandCruiser's performance. The golden rule about mud driving is to stay on the track. It may be bad here, but it's generally a lot worse off the edges. If your progress is halted, it's time to have a closer look at the situation and check out the hazard on foot, especially when it looks pretty grim and sticky from the cab. This sort of thing may mean you'll have to clean your carpets, but it will give you a better idea of whether the track is passable. Remember too, that you may get through this bog only to strike a deeper one a few meters further on. If your experience tells you that you can make it, and you are sure that your trip is necessary, back up along your tracks, making sure to keep to the wheel ruts. Then take a run at it, using the vehicle momentum, the highest gear possible, and gently pump the accelerator to generate a pitching motion to aid traction. Naturally, if you're faced with a steep, muddy slope, a flying start and plenty of traction may get you through it, but it isn't going to do the track any good. Other people use forest trails, and you're not going to win any friends if you carve up a bush trail that may be needed in an emergency. You cause less damage to the surface by using your winch. It's safer to winch up the middle of the track. Remember that the edges may be in worse condition, but adequate anchor points, like trees, don't grow in the middle of tracks. An alternative is to use a series of stakes driven into the ground. 2 stakes are being used here, but with a heavier load and on really steep slopes, you will need to use more. Each stake is joined to the next by a chain or rope, and the winch cable is attached to the first stake at ground level. By winching the LandCruiser up the slope, rather than taking a wheel-spinning run at it, the track is left relatively undamaged. Mud and moisture clings to the body panels, and so a thorough clean-up after a mud driving session is essential. It's also wise to check brakes because mud can seriously damage linings. Toyota trusts that your understanding of the many techniques required has been increased by the demonstrations we've just seen. At work or play, the operation of a 4-wheel drive vehicle requires skill, care, and patience. Attributes that will be enhanced with practice and observation. As you gain experience, you'll find driving safer and more enjoyable, and you'll be confident of always getting through.